There we are. Can everybody see the presentation that's in front of them? Perfect. If you would, please all direct your attention to the chat. During our presentation, it's going to be the best way for you guys to communicate with us. Alrighty, so let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the Assisted Living Licensing Statutes and Regulations, Part 1. Today, I will be taking you on a journey through Alaska Statute 4732, 4733, and 4705, as well as 7 AAC 75 and 7 AAC 10. Go ahead, Jill. There we go. As you can see, there are two people listed as presenters. Julia, unfortunately, was not able to be here with us, but she is a great resource for you as potential new home applicants. Please feel free to save this slide and record our information. Julia is available at her number there listed on the screen, 269-3642, as well as through email, which is julia.greenfield@alaska.gov. And there is my information. You can contact me on my direct line at 907-334-2494. And my email there is nate.allen@alaska.gov. A little bit about me. I've been with the Assisted Living Licensing Program for 6 years now. Prior to this, I was a resident manager of a 7-bed assisted living home for a small nonprofit in Seward, Alaska. And prior to that, I was a direct care provider for Hope Community Resources here in Anchorage when I was going to college. I have a background and I have a degree in biology with a minor in communication, as well as a second degree in psychology. And I've currently been working on an associate's degree in criminal justice. Needless to say, I have some education. And let's go ahead and move forward. Alrighty, so a little bit about residential licensing. The missions of licensing is to protect and reduce the risk to the health, safety, and exploitation of Alaska's most vulnerable citizens being served, and to ensure that there is public confidence in the healthcare and community service delivery system throughout regulatory enforcement and through educational activities like this today. As I said before, throughout our presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. Please do not interrupt the conversation. We'll wait until some sections at the end for questions, but it will work best if you ensure that you are on mute so that we do not hear your conversations that you may be having in the background. Like I said, there'll be certain places in the presentation that I'll ask for questions. And like I said, it's best just to put them on the chat. Addition to myself on this Zoom meeting today, I do have 3 other licensing specialists from our program that are on with us, and that is Matthew Manus, Christy Ferrist, and Jordan Gingery. If you feel like you have a particular question and you would like to ask somebody from licensing directly, feel free to look them up on the chat, and you are able to directly message them with a question. Jill, is there a way to turn everybody's mic on mute?
Is there anyone that's not muted?
Yeah, I got someone here, I think. I keep getting background noise on my end.
I think I caught it already. We just have to watch. If people don't stay on mute, we just have to watch and catch it ourselves.
Okay, gotcha. All righty. We can move forward there, Jill. Thank you. So the mission for licensing is completed by conducting inspections of adult and children's residential facilities to ensure compliance with the state licensing requirements. Our program receives and investigates complaints involving residents for physical, mental, and sexual abuse. That also includes financial exploitation and any type of safety or sanitation concerns. We provide notices of violations where we will spell out the actions we are taking against the facility and what we are requiring for those facilities to come into compliance with the state and federal laws. We ensure that there is a process where all service providers with direct client access have access to a background check. Go ahead, Jill. Our little program is, we are all stationed here in Anchorage, Alaska. We have a program manager, 2 community care licensing specialists 2s, and 11 community care licensing specialists 1. Our little team covers all of the facilities that are currently in the state of Alaska. In this Zoom meeting today, for example, on my caseload, I cover homes here in Anchorage, the Valley. In addition to that, though, I also cover the Kenai Peninsula, Soldotna and Kenai, and I also cover the region of Valdez. Matthew Manus, who's on the chat with us, he covers the southeast region of Alaska, and Kodiak. And Jordan, another licensing specialist online with us, covers the Seward area. So our team of 11 is broken down into different sections throughout the state. Go ahead, Jill. So the assisted living licensing was created by Chapter 33 of Alaska state law. And what it did is it developed a system of care by establishing assisted living homes so they could provide a home-like environment for elderly persons or individuals with a mental or physical disability who needed assistance with activities of daily living. It promoted the idea of individuals having a place that they could age in place and be able to ensure confidence in those residential like settings for them to receive care and to be monitored. Go ahead, Jill. Requires that residents of assisted living home have an assisted living plan that identifies their services and needs, provides a resident of an assisted living home the ability to implement that care plan and be involved in the decisions regarding their care. Also underneath the Chapter 33 of the law, it applies to specifically homes wishing to serve 3 or more adults not related to the owner receiving any type of federal or state payments, or any homes receiving state or federal payments. So what does that part mean? That means under Chapter 33 of Alaska state law, in the state of Alaska, you can run a unlicensed 2 or 1 bed facility if you are solely going to be accepting private pay residents. If you wish to become Medicaid certified or accept any type of federal or state payment, you will need to have a license regardless of the number of individuals you are serving. No. So if you want 1 person in your home, but you're going to be billing a Medicaid waiver, you will need a license. If you have 1 private pay resident, you do not have to have a license, but you can if you wish to. It's called a voluntary license. Once you pass 3 or more private residents, you do have to have a license in the state of Alaska if you are solely going to be billing private pay. Go ahead, Jill. So here's a little breakdown of the state of Alaska. At the end of our fiscal year, we were at 683 assisted living homes throughout the state of Alaska. Of that, we had 225 SS homes. When I say the word SS, I am referring to what we kind of call our senior license. It's our license that is for those 18 years or older. with a physical disability that are elderly with dementia but are not chronically mentally ill. Of those 225 homes in the state of Alaska, they make up approximately 2,300 beds. We have 411 DDMH licenses. That's our developmental disability, mental disability license that make up about 1,600 beds. We do have 47 dual licensed homes within the state that make up approximately 412 beds. Now, when I say dual license, that means they hold a license that is both the license type for the SS and the typing for the DDMH license. A little breakdown of Anchorage. Currently, we have 449 homes located here in Anchorage, 14 in Eagle River, and 4 in Chugiak. If you look there, I have a little bit of a breakdown that kind of shows you the disbursement of homes throughout regions. Our primary amount of assisted living homes are located there in the South Central region with approximately 617. And then we break it down to the Southeast. This is including Kodiak, Dillingham, Bethel. It's approximately 14. The interior, this would be Fairbanks, the North Slope Borough, making up approximately 37. And then we have 10 in the Southwest. I'm sorry, I have the Southeast and Southwest confused. Southeast would be Juneau, Ketchikan, the main handle of Alaska. Southeast is Kodiak, Dillingham. And then we have what's referred to as the far north. This is actually Borough, and I believe, I can't recall. But you can see that we have a pretty, unique dispersal of homes throughout the state of Alaska. Go ahead, Jill. So here's a breakdown a little bit of the year for us at licensing. One of our primary duties is to review notifications, critical incident reports, what's the other one? Any type of notification to the department. Over the last 3 years, this document shows how many of those reports our program has processed. As you can see here in FY18, 7,800, FY19, 8,800, and then FY20, 8,600. Every one of those reports was reviewed by an individual in our office and read to its completion. From those reports that we received, they resulted in investigations. So you can see from the 7,800 that were submitted in FY18, approximately 340 investigations were initiated by our department and investigated. And you can kind of see there in FY20, we initiated 292 investigations. Alrighty. Is there any questions before we get started on the premise? In the chat, any questions? Already not seeing anything. Let's get started on the facility. Go ahead, Joe. So take a note of this very first slide that we're on. It's titled The Premise. Underneath the premise, you'll see 7 AAC 10.1095 premise. This right here is the code and the Alaska statutes and regulations that the items that I will be reviewing are located from. Every slide throughout our presentation today will have this numbering system. So if you ever see something and you're curious about where you can find it, you'll find it right underneath the title. So when it comes to your premise, we need to make sure that your grounds are clean, safe, and in good repair, free of hazards. The facility have walls and ceilings that are smooth, durable, non-absorbent, easily cleanable. Your stairways and steps have handrails, and you are not using any type of lead-based paint. The hot water in the facility should be between 100 degrees Fahrenheit, no more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Any type of cleaners, medicines, and harmful substances stored are inaccessible to adults with impaired judgment. Furniture and equipment is durable, safe, easily cleanable, and in good repair. And for homes that are licensed with dementia, for individuals with dementia or any type of cognitive impairment, the home should have a system in place to alert staff when someone is exiting the building. This can include door alarms. We have these fancy security things that tell us when our back door is open, front door open, side window open. But in some cases, you may have individuals where you might not need to worry about that, and you may have an alarm system that you don't need to have armed, and that's acceptable. You should just have something in place, because as our individuals age and develop, those type of concerns can arise, and you want to be prepared for those changes. Go ahead, Jill. Alrighty, so this is our general environment. This is 7 AAC 75260. The home shall ensure that each resident has room furniture typical for the homes in the community in which the assisted living home is located, meaning that you should be providing a bed and some of those basic items. Now, does that mean that each room needs to have a TV? Not necessarily, but residents should have some furnishings in their room that are typical to the area your home is located. That includes space and storage for clothing and possessions. The facility should have linen, soap, and personal hygiene facilities. Signal devices, if they are needed, if they are needed in the assisted living plan of a resident, the home should have those items. Residents should have reasonable privacy when they're sharing a room. So this can look unique. Some homes will use a faux wall. Some homes will even go as using a curtain. The facility that I ran, I had one shared room where they had a faux wall that they had set up for so they could have privacy. And then I had another room where the two residents had lived together for years and were like sisters, and they chose not to have any separation. If they're choosing not to have any separation for privacy, that's acceptable. You should have appropriate storage for work and appropriate storage and working areas for preparing food and doing laundry. Alrighty, your room sizes. This is underneath 7 AAC 75260. So for a single occupant room, you must have an open floor space of 80 square feet. There's no requirements about how wide or how long that measurement has to be. There just needs to be an open space of 80 square feet. That means that you cannot include your closet as part of the open square footage of the room. For a double occupancy room, you are required to have a minimum square footage of 140 square feet. You must, when it comes to double occupancy, that's the max you can have in a room, meaning no more than 2 residents per shared room. Windows, this is underneath 7 AAC 1010 I3 A and B. So your window sill height, this is to where your window ledge is, can be no more than 44 inches above the floor. If it is taller than 44 inches, you are able to install a step. If you find yourself in a situation where you will need to put in a step, you can visit the Municipality of Anchorage's website. And if you look up the policy A01, Emergency Escape and Rescue Openings, there it will detail the requirements of what that step is that you need to have in place to meet the fire and safety requirements. Your window will need to have a net clear opening of approximately 5.7 square feet. Now, this part here will get a little tricky, it can get a little confusing. So the height of the window, the height of the window opening, this is where the area where the opening of the window is, may not be less than 24 inches. So if you open your window and you measure your height, it has to be at least 24 inches tall. Now, in order for you to meet the requirement, if your window is exactly 24 inches tall, then it will have to have an opening width of 34.25 inches. Now, as you get taller, as your window height gets taller, say your window height is 30 inches, you will need a smaller increment to be able to ensure that opening size. It's approximately about 30 inches then at that point. Now, that does not mean that you can have a window that's wider. So for example, if you had a 24-inch tall window and it had a 40-inch wide opening, it would still meet the requirements. Now, when it comes to your width, the width of the window opening cannot be less than 20 inches. Now, if your window opening is exactly at 20 inches, then the height could be a minimum of 41.25 inches tall. You can see there that it gets a little confusing sometimes, but it's a great practice if you're looking at a facility. Measure your windows. Most windows meet the requirements of building code, which is where you see these measurements is in standard building code. The idea is that the window width opening should be large enough for a fully geared firefighter to be able to enter the window. These are great topics. Windows, if you ever have questions, you can always contact licensing and we can talk to you about window opening requirements. Go ahead, Jill. Carbon monoxide detectors. Underneath 7 AAC 1010, Life and Fire Safety K, each of the sleeping areas of the home, or no more than 3 feet from the entrance to an area, must have a carbon monoxide detector. And you must have at least one carbon monoxide detector on each level of the home. So in some areas where you might have a bedroom, 2 bedrooms located directly next to each other, you may have a carbon monoxide detector right out the door that's able to meet the requirements for 2 bedrooms. You do not necessarily have to have a carbon monoxide detector in each bedroom, but one of the items when we conduct our inspections we'll be looking for is ensuring that each sleeping area has one within 3 feet. Smoke detectors are underneath 7 AAC 1010, Life and Fire Safety I6. All your smoke detectors in your home must have a battery backup. You must have one in each bedroom, and you must have one on each floor. And they cannot be any older than 10 years old. So if you go into a home and you see any type of square, probably very stained yellow smoke detectors, good chance that that's older than 10 years. A great thing you can do is actually take it off and look at the back, and it will see there's actually expiration dates located on the back of your smoke detectors. So if you're looking at a facility, I would check all those and make sure they're current. It might not hurt to go about and replace all those. Go ahead, Jill. Fire extinguishers. 7 AAC 1010, Life and Fire Safety I7. You must have at least one fully charged 2A 10 BC dry fire extinguisher on each level of the facility. Best practice when it comes to your fire extinguisher is these are usually your larger non what I call kitchen fire extinguisher. Kitchen and fire extinguishers are these small, slender fire extinguishers. They're approximately 5 pounds. Those do not meet this requirement. You usually need a larger fire extinguisher. When you look at fire extinguishers, there's a label, and you'll see on the label, it will label it as a 2A 10 BC. Now, there are larger ones. I believe there's a 3A 40BC, which are acceptable. It just needs to be larger than the 2A 10BC. When it comes to your fire extinguishers, after they are purchased yearly, they must be inspected, tested, and serviced by a qualified professional. There are some different agencies and towns that provide that service, being able to inspect them. I know that some homes have gotten into the habit of just buying new fire extinguishers every year because it tends to be cheaper than actually getting them inspected. It's completely up to you how you would like to go about that. If you are purchasing fire extinguishers for your initial inspection, keep your receipts. It's a great thing to attach those to your fire extinguisher because it lets us know that they're brandly newly purchased and don't require that inspection. If you put up brand new ones and don't have that, it's hard for us to tell in some cases whether or not those are new, and you may be required to go out and get it tested even though you just bought it. Go ahead. Alrighty. Fire sprinkler systems. This is underneath 7 AAC 1010 Life, Fire, and Safety. Homes wishing to be licensed for 2 or fewer are not required to have a fire sprinkler system. Homes wishing to be licensed for 3 or more will need to contact their local fire safety and or building safety department to determine if they need a fire sprinkler system. Fire authority will depend on the location that you are under and wish to be licensed. If you are wishing to be licensed for 3 or more in the municipality of Anchorage, you will be required to have a sprinkler system. The type of fire sprinkler system required will vary by the number of residents and the population you wish to serve. Here later on in the presentation, one of our presentations later, I'll provide you with a little more information on who you can contact regarding that. Within these requirements, the borough of Fairbanks also requires fire sprinkler systems for 3 or more residents. Outside of Anchorage and Fairbanks, those requirements will vary by the community and by the local fire authority. If you have any questions, it's a great topic for you to talk to licensing specialists about, and let us try to help you direct you to the right people to ensure that you're in compliance with local fire authority. Bathrooms. So underneath 7 AAC 1030 toilet, sink, showers, and bathing facilities, you are required to have a toilet for 1 in every 6 persons in the home. Now, these regs are a little unique because it's not talking about your residents. It is talking about the number of occupants that live in the home. So if you're choosing to run an assisted living home and you have a family of 5 and you want to get licensed for 5, the total number of individuals we would be looking at in your home would be 10, which we would then say that you need to have at least 2 toilets. You will be required to have 2 sinks and 2 bathrooms, bathing and shower tubs. You can see their toilets 1 per 6, hand sinks 1 per 6, bathtubs and showers 1 per 6. Each of your bathrooms must have a waste receptacle, and you must have toilet tissue that's hung from the wall or on a stand. Your toilet paper cannot just sit on the sink. Your bathrooms must be kept clean and sanitary. For homes with 3 or more residents, you must have either a single-use towel dispenser or you must launder your clothing, cloth towels after each use, or have assigned cloth towels for everyone. The more residents you get, the idea of having a personalized towel can get very difficult. So just keep that in mind. Room temperatures. 7 AAC 101015 heating and heating devices. The home must have a ambient temperature of at least 68 degrees. You know, which can cause some problems for homes located in the farther north. You need to be prepared to have a heating system that can keep your home warm. If you are using any type of portable electric heaters, they must be equipped with a tip over switch. If you are using any type of portable heaters, you will have to develop and implement a policy that is submitted and approved by licensing for their use. Smoking underneath 7 AAC 1085 smoking. If you choose to allow smoking at your facility, you must have a designated area where individuals can smoke. If you are providing indoor smoking area, you must ensure that has sufficient ventilation and provides fresh air to prevent the accumulation of smoke or smoke odor. With the changes regarding marijuana, marijuana is considered recreational and is treated similarly to as cigarettes, meaning you need to have specific house rules that address its use. You can prohibit the use, but ensure that if you are going to allow recreational marijuana in the home, that you are in compliance with the other regulations and ordinances that may apply regarding the smoking of marijuana. Inside of your home, you will need to have a disaster kit. The disaster kit is located underneath 7 AAC 1010 Life, Fire, and Safety J. You must have a disaster kit with at least one flashlight and batteries, one battery-operated radio with additional batteries to operate it. You must have potable drinking water. You must have non-perishable foods. Do keep in mind that when it comes to non-perishable foods, that we do consider part of the home's pantry, if you have a large backstop pantry, as part of your disaster kit. But you should have special designated food in the event of a disaster. You need to have blankets. This can include emergency blankets and those tiny little packs, or regular cloth blankets. It's up to your choice. I would recommend actually utilizing both. And it's recommended that you have at least 3 days worth of supplies for all of your caregivers and your residents. One of the things when it comes to disaster planning is that the best thing you can do is make sure that everybody in the home, including your staff, are prepared for the event of a disaster. If your staff are well prepared, they're more likely to show up to work to be able to help at the assisted living home. So those are some things that really can be beneficial. If you need any more additional resources regarding disaster planning, we do have a great handout and resource located on the state licensing website underneath provider forms and resources. First aid kits. This is underneath 7 AAC 101075, your first aid kit and procedure C. You are required to post emergency telephone numbers and first aid kit procedures. You must have at least one kit for the home and one kit for any type of outings from the entity. This is what's called a non-abbreviated, meaning that it can't be just a few items. It needs to be a full kit. This is a great section to save because in this next slide here, we're going to go through each of the items that you need to have in your first aid kit. So the items you need for your first aid kit include disposable, non-porous, non-latex gloves, sealed packages of alcohol wipes or antiseptics for cleaning the thermometer, scissors, tweezers, a thermometer, adhesive bandages, bandage tape, sterile gauze pads, flexible roller gauze, triangle bandages, safety pins, A really good helpful hint is that typically triangle bandages contain a safety pins. So that's somewhere you can look for those. Eye dressings, these are often referred to as iPads, and they're not as expensive. Notepads and pencils must have activated charcoal. Activated charcoal will only be used at the discretion of poison control or a medical professional. If you live in Anchorage, it is highly unlikely you would ever utilize activated charcoal, but given the widespread of assisted living homes throughout the state, as while largely activated charcoal does still exist in our regs, because there are areas of the state that may be required to utilize charcoal as a life-saving measure. A cold pack, you need to have a current American Academy of Pediatrics or American Red Cross standard first aid text or first aid guide. Often the guides that are included in any type of first aid kit are usually typically acceptable. If you have any questions, you can also contact licensing. You need to have a CPR barrier mask or device. You should have the telephone number for poison control included in your kit. A great tip is to include it in your notepad, and you can also get stickers for your case. You should have potable drinking water located within your kit. You should have splints, including small child-sized splints if you have a child in care. This probably will not apply to most individuals in assisted living. There may be cases where there may be someone who's probably maybe 16, 17-year-old who may need placement in an assisted living home. And usually that comes with a variance because your license is prohibited from providing services for those that are 18 years or older, so 17 years and younger. You will need soap in your kit and a working flashlight. Alrighty, so medication storage. This is underneath 7 AAC 101070 medications. So medications need to be stored in a manner that prevent access by residents. Controlled substances must be in a locked, permanently affixed storage container. You can see there's two differences. If your home doesn't have controlled substance, it does not say that it needs to necessarily be locked. It just needs to be stored in a manner that prevents access by residents. It's a great habit just to keep everything underneath locked to prevent those that do not need access to medications. If your controlled substance need refrigerations, they must be also locked in a permanently affixed storage container. This is sometimes seen as individuals are able to put a lock on one of the butter drawers or one of the drawers in a refrigerator and lock it. You may be also able to purchase a small lockable refrigerator. When it comes to one of your policies that you will be required to submit to licensing is you must have a policy that outlines the use of accounting for controlled substances. So this will be a policy that will outline how the home will document the receipt and use and reconciliation of controlled medications. Licensing requires that you reconcile, meaning that you are verifying the amount of medications on hand at a minimum of at least once a week. Best practice is every shift. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age where controlled substances are a hot commodity. And unfortunately, there are incidences of caregivers stealing medications from homes. So it's great to have a system in a place that can keep you accountable for those items and where they are at. Non-prescription and health supplements must be stored in their original container, and they must be labeled for the resident therefore. Go ahead, Jill. A continuation of medication storage. If the home is providing any commonly used non-prescription medications, this would be if the home provides aspirin, Tums, Benadryl, cough syrup, You must have a policy in place for determining how that medication will be used and who it will be given to. Most homes nowadays don't really practice this. They usually have homes require that the resident have some type of prescription or have something in place by their primary physician so that they can be able to dispense medication to them or, you know, give them the cough syrup at their doctor's recommended dosage. If you are administering medication, you need to have at least one employee per shift that is solely designated with giving and recording medication. In most cases, most homes provide assistance with self-administration and don't necessarily fall underneath this clause. But if you find that you are providing the training to staff to administer medication, which we'll touch on a little bit later, you will need to make sure that you have one designated person per shift in the home who is administering medication. You must ensure that the home properly discards of any used medication. And if you are using any type of medicine set, you often hear medisets are from pharmacies, but this can include any type of plastic reusable medication set. You need to ensure that there is a label adhered or stored with it that includes relevant information. When it comes to med sets, they can only be filled by the resident's guardian, power of attorney, nurse, or a licensed professional. As an assisted living home owner, unless you have a professional license that allows you to do so, you cannot fill a resident's medicine set. And then I see right now we have a question in the chat. And now this is a great time if you guys have any questions to focus on the chat and insert those questions in the chat. So one of the questions that we have from Samantha is, can the assisted living home staff give medication if the residents needs them to do so? So what this sounds like is a form of assistance with self-administration of medications, which we'll be reviewing a little bit later. Staff are able to open residents' medications. They're able to reassure residents they're taking the proper dose, and they are able to provide handover assistance. We have a question. Do the smoke detectors or sprinkler systems need to be monitored by anyone, for example, AFD, APD, or third party? I keep hearing there is a requirement, but I don't see it as mentioned on that. So when you look into the actual regulations requiring fire sprinkler systems, in order for you to be able to have an evacuation of 13 minutes with a sprinkler system, they do have to be monitored. They have to be monitored. We do allow for a third party to monitor your sprinkler system, as long as what is required is that if your smoke detector or smoke alarm system goes off, that 911 is immediately contacted and notifies the Anchorage Fire Department or any type of local fire authority. We have another question. Will the PowerPoint be available after the course? I believe in the course material, there was a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Is that correct, Diane or Jill?
Yes, that's correct. It's in the e-learning portal.
So there is in your, if you go into your e-portal for this presentation, you should see available handouts, and there's a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. We have another question. If a resident wants their room above 68 degrees, is that okay? Yes, when it comes to room temperature, there is no requirement that goes over. You know, they can have the room as warm as they want it to be. Yeah, that always becomes an issue, you know, especially in the summertime. You know, if a resident has their window open, you know, when it comes to the home temperatures, given that a lot of Alaska homes don't have AC units, we look at that a little bit differently, and we look on it as a case-by-case basis. You know, if a resident wants their window open and they're aware that they can close it, typically it's not a problem. When it comes to the home's temperature, we tend to focus main on the community areas and kind of look more specifically at the residents' rooms. Just keep it in mind, if your resident's complaining it's too cold, you need to ensure that their room's at least 68 degrees. Alrighty, we have another question. How can I manage the use of marijuana at the assisted living home? Can I prohibit the use? Correct. You do not have to allow marijuana in your home or on your premise. Inside, in your house rules, you can outline the use of that item. And that can include if somebody has a medical marijuana card. Now, one of the tools that we'll really start preaching here in our next session is the use of screening. And that is your ability to interview people when they're coming into your assisted living home. If you do not want to allow marijuana in your facility, it's an item you should screen for. And then, so if you bring a person into the home that says, oh, I have a medical marijuana card, and I want to be able to smoke marijuana, and you don't want that in your home, probably not a great idea to admit them to your home. It's interesting because I'm not aware of any type of official medical marijuana card in the state of Alaska. I'm not aware of any type of I have a right to marijuana type situations. If the home prohibits the use, the home can prohibit its use. Is there any other questions before we move on? Any of my licensing specialists, did you have any questions from the presentation? You guys can answer in the chat if you want. Awesome. Alrighty, guys. Well, let's move on into our next session. Next part of our presentation. And now we are going to turn our focus onto the organization and the operation of the assisted living home. Go ahead, Jill. Alrighty. So your administrator and your staffing. This is going to be underneath 7 AAC. 75210 organization administration staff. So when it comes to your assisted living, when it comes to your assisted living home, you will need to have a designated administrator. The administrator of your home is the individual who will oversee the day-to-day operations of the home. And in order to be the administrator, you will need to meet certain requirements. These here are your requirements to be the administrator of the home. If you are wishing to serve 1 to 10 residents, you will need to have a bachelor's degree in criminology, health administration, or another health-related field that meets the department's satisfaction. This often can include degrees in biology, special education, psychology. If you have a degree outside that, you can always talk to your licensing specialist or our program about whether or not you qualify. You can have your CNA license and 1 year of experience with the relevant population you're wishing to serve. You can complete an approved management administrative training course, which in the state of Alaska, we only have one, which is the Alaska Core Competencies, which is provided by our great partners here today, the Alaska Training Cooperative. They offer this as an online classroom. It's approximately a 32-hour training that essentially counts for almost 1 year of experience. If you take the approved management course, in addition to having 1 year of experience, will approve you. You can have 2 years of document experience with the population, or if you can submit any type of documentation otherwise showing that you qualify to fulfill the duties of an administrator. So if you believe that you have the experience and you can show us and document it, that documented experience, this often includes most people that are like going to have a personal PCA for a number of years. You might be able, you can and submit that information to our department regarding the qualifications. If you are wishing to serve 11 or more, you can complete the Alaska training, the Alaska core competency, and have the 2 years of experience. Do you want to go back, Joe? When it comes to accessing the core competencies, you can actually go back to the main page, the web page for the Alaska Training Cooperative, and you can go into their search and search to see if they have a current class. Jill, do you know if there's any current classes planned for the Alaska core competencies?
I just saw that Betsy just posted a new class. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but they're certainly available on our catalog at AKTC LMS.
Perfect. So if you wanting to follow up anything about the core competencies, you can go back to the main website that you were able to register for this course, and you can check their course catalog, and you can look through the core competencies and register for those classes. Once again, coming back to serving 11 or more, you can have 5 years of documented experience serving as an administrator of a home with 10 or less residents, or you can be a licensed LPN RN with documented experience relevant to the population being served. You can see there that there is, and with that, it's at the discretion of licensing for an RN or LPN to determine if they qualify. Jill, could we go back to the previous slide? Awesome. Alrighty, so back to the staffing organizations. In addition to your administrator, you are required to have a designee. This is a person that you will the administrator appoints to act on the behalf of the administrator. You can have more than one. I think it's important to know that you can own an assisted living license and have a different administrator. Your administrator does not have to own the license in order to be able to operate. So for example, if you have a facility and you want to open up an assisted living home, but you yourself are not qualified to be an administrator, you are able to hire someone and bring them on board to administer your home. In some cases, you may be required to have a resident manager. So a resident manager is if the administrator is not overseeing the home's day-to-day operation, this is the person that does. So for example, I'd mentioned in the beginning of the training that I was a resident manager. I worked for a nonprofit agency where our administrator was the director of behavioral health who worked in our main office. And so he had their credentials, but I was the person that oversees the day-to-day operations of the home. You are not, you will not be, in most situations for people wanting to apply for a small mom and pop type assisted living home, you will not be required to have a resident manager. If at some point during the review of your application it's determined that you need one, you would be notified. The resident manager meets the same qualification requirements as the administrator. On our website, we do have the questionnaires posted that we will review in tomorrow's session of the application process. Alrighty, Jill, we're good. And we can skip that one. Alrighty, so this is your staffing. This is your 7 AAC 75-210 organization administration staff. So when you submit your new home application, one item you'll be required to have is personnel practices. These are the things that you want to consider of how you expect your staff to conduct themselves. Now, a lot of applicants these days that we've been receiving are wanting to open up what we call as like a mom and pop 2-bed type of facility. in these type of facilities, people are like, well, I'm not going to have staff. Be prepared to provide these items anyways. You know, it's great that you're thinking, you know, we're going to run this, but everybody needs a break. You know, things change, life happens. You want to be prepared to have staff, to have to hire staff, and to bring staff on board. So personnel practices, these are the expectations that you want your staff to conduct themselves at the home. If you look here at the regulation, you'll see that there are no specific requirements that you need to submit. But some things to think about that are really common use are like, what happens if an employee's sick? Do they get leave? Are they allowed to use their cell phone at work? These are things that you'll want to kind of think through. There's some great resources out there. There's a small business development center that can provide some great resources when it comes to implementing personnel practices. It's also very wise to consult with a lawyer regarding those to ensure that the home's operating in compliance with the other type of labor practice laws that exist out there. You'll need to create a staffing plan and have staffing responsibilities, so essentially job descriptions. A lot of people in our world are asked frequently, what are the ratios? How many people can I have per caregiver? Licensing in assisted living licensing, there are no ratios because of this item right here. The home must have sufficient number of care providers and other employees with adequate training to implement the home's general staffing plan and to meet the specific needs of the residents as defined in their contract and their assisted living plan. So a great example of this, you have a 5-bed home and you have 3 residents on there that are a 2-person assist, but you have 1 staff member working that shift. Immediately we've identified 3 individuals that need a minimum of 2 people to be safely transferred and lifted. That means the expectation would be that you would have at least 2 people on board. Now, as I said, you have 3 people that are 2-person assist. Now, when it comes to other items that you might want to consider, such as disaster planning, will 2 staff be sufficient enough to ensure that all the individuals in your home can get out in the time that you've allowed? The standard is usually 3 minutes. If you have a sprinkle with a monitoring system, you have 13 minutes. So there's some different items that you'll want to consider when building your staffing plan. You may find that there are some times, like in the morning during shower routines, that you need to bring on additional staff so that residents are getting the care needs they met in a timely manner. Go ahead, Jill. Your care providers, this is underneath 7 AAC 75240, care providers. In order to serve as a supervisor or a designee in the home, they must be at least 21 years of age. This would include your administrator as well. To work without any type of direct supervision, they must be at least 18 years of age. And you can actually hire individuals 16 and 17 years old to work in the home as care providers, but they do require direct supervision. They cannot be left alone with the residents. Whenever you hire a care provider, they must be oriented to the home's assisted living home policies and procedures within 14 days of employment. For those that you hire that do not have previous experience working with the population your home serves, they must have 3 days, 8 hours a day of working with the population. They must serve in a supervised shadowing in the home for at least 3 days. We get questions asked, well, I'm bringing a person in to work a 4-hour shift. They're going to work 3 4-hour shifts. Does that cover it? No. We're looking at this as a normal work day of 8 hours, 3 days, approximately 24 hours of shadowing before being left alone with residents. Now, if you do hire someone that does have previous experience, make sure you document that previous experience so that if anything comes up, licensing comes knocking, you can show us that the person that's been left alone has that sufficient documented experience to be left alone with residents. Alrighty, so your general staffing requirements. This is underneath 7 AAC 75-220 general requirements. When you hire your staff, you'll need to obtain at least 3 character references. These character references can be using like a reference sheet. We do provide a really nice sample form that you're welcome to use. This can also be like letters of recommendation. You'll also need to obtain 2 employment references. Your employment references can serve as character references. Just make sure it's notated. So, you know, if I'm your employer, Nate, and I'm going to be a person's character, make sure it states, you know, my name's Nate Allen. I can attest to Nate's, you know, staff A's employment and character, blah, blah, blah. Make sure it's spelled out for us. You are required to have all your employees have a background check, and they must have at least provisional clearance before working in the home. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. You need to ensure that your caregivers, employees, and household members are free from active tuberculosis. This can include a shot or a screening for tuberculosis. If you are inoculated and from TB, make sure to provide documentation that demonstrates that you're inoculated, immunized, and that you don't necessarily need a TB test. You know, if you're required to have an X-ray, you'll be required to have an X-ray every year. So keep that in mind, unless you have documentation that states otherwise. But we do check to make sure everybody in the home is free of tuberculosis. This can be a very important piece, making sure that each of your staff member is able to speak and understand the English language. In cases where you may have someone working on shift that does not speak English or English as a second language, it may be acceptable to have them working with somebody else that is, but they would not be able to be left alone. It's great as part of a screening and new hire process to be able to test individuals' ability to speak English and to ensure that in the event of an emergency, that a caregiver can actively tell a dispatch worker where the emergency is and what help's needed. I always share in this presentation that, you know, even though there's some of us that have been speaking English our entire lives, we find ourselves in an emergency situation and we can sometimes forget how to speak. A great practice and a great tool is to have a script ready by your phone, you know, that outlines your address of your home, you know, and what staff should do in the event of an emergency. It's a great practice and it's a great drill for staff just to be prepared. You know, some people working in this industry may have a lot of experience dealing with, you know, individuals passing, and so that might not scare someone when they need to call in the event of an emergency. But some of us have never had to deal with that. So the first time, you want to make sure your staff are prepared and able to handle that situation. Your staff are required to have 12 hours of continuing education. This does not have to be certified CEUs. This can include items like if you provide an in-service training to all of your staff that takes an hour, you can document it and your staff can use it as an hour of continuing education. Administrators and resident managers are required to have 18 hours of continuing education a year. Each of your, you must have at least one care provider on shift that has current CPR and first aid. Keep in mind when it comes to CPR and first aid, there are some specific requirements that largely deal with that it needs to be through the American Red Cross or the American Heart Association or through an approved course that we've approved. If you have any questions about your CPR, the best place to go is to actually contact us. Hey, Nate, I found this class. Is this acceptable? I know it's not Red Cross or American Heart Association. Typically, the standard is that there must be a hands-on portion to your CPR course, basically a skills training that will ensure that competency in order to be able to perform CPR first aid. Alrighty, so universal precautions, 7 AAC 101045, universal precautions policy. So when you're applying for your home, you need to have a universal precautions policy. And this should train staff in the prevention of the spread of disease. The regulations require that your policy include adults to wash hands, and also require that in the event a caregiver has a communicable disease, rash, or infection, or any type of acute respiratory infection, they should not be working in the entity. Along this line, within this current environment we're living with, it's a great idea to make your universal precautions to make sure you're addressing the concerns with COVID. It's something we haven't seen before, but it's something you should be prepared for. If you're looking for specific resources about assisted living and COVID-19, our website is a great resource. Currently, the best recommendation that I would say is regarding the process of reopening your assisted living home. So as a new applicant coming in, you're going to be essentially starting in the very beginning, phase one. You'll be bringing people in where you're going to need to be checking them, ensuring that they're testing negative for COVID, possibly having them quarantine in order to ensure safety. So right now it's kind of an unusual and unique time to be opening an assisted living home, but at the same time can be a very much needed thing. If you have any specific questions, licensing is available to answer those questions, as well as point you to resources that you're able to use when developing your policies. We're good, Jill. Awesome. Alrighty, so prevention of abuse, neglect, and exploitation policy. This is underneath 7 AAC 75220, General Requirements A. When it comes to the application process, your abuse, neglect, and exploitation policy is one of the few policies that you will need to create for us. We provide a lot of sample forms and a lot of sample items, but this is one item that you will need to build. Your policy will need to ensure that it outlines what safeguards the home is utilizing to prevent abuse, neglect, and exploitation. This can include things like having a sign-in sheet, posting in different areas of the home that all abuse, neglect, and exploitation will be reported, that all your caregivers have a background check, that staff are trained in the recognition of abuse and neglect and know how to report it. Your policy needs to outline what will happen in the event there is an allegation of abuse and what steps the home will take to remove that threat. And your policy should also outline how the home documents and investigates abuse, neglect, and exploitation. One thing I would really encourage is that your policy include how to identify the different types of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. That way your policy can serve not only as your policy, but also as a training tool for your staff on how to identify abuse. It's also a great practice to include in your policy who they need to contact in the event they need to report abuse. It's really important to remember that all of your caregivers and yourself working in an assisted living home are mandated reporters. You are required by law to report suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Especially when it comes to our caregivers, their duty is not fulfilled until they have made a report to Adult Protective Service and the Central Intake Unit. At large times we see people thinking that, oh, I told my supervisor I was concerned about this case of abuse and neglect I observed. Their duty is not fulfilled until they have made the report themselves. They do not fulfill their duty by telling a supervisor, or in your case, if you're an administrator, by them telling you. It is a misdemeanor to not file your report and meet your mandatory duty reportings. If you have any questions regarding your building your abuse, neglect, or exploitation policy, feel free to contact licensing and we can help you with that. All right, let's move on. So as I touched on earlier, one of the requirements for your home is that you do have staff that have all had a background check. The regulations regarding background checks can be found in 7 AAC 10900 to 10990. All individuals that work in a licensed, certified, or are eligible for payment from the state of Alaska are required to have background checks. The background check program works to determine the eligibility of the applicant and ensure they are not barred from employment within the home. Go ahead, Joe. So when you submit your new home application to licensing, that will start your access to a background check account. When you submit your new home, what we will do is we notify the background check program that you are now applying for licenses and you need access to the background check program. This will be so that you can create your own home profile for your assisted living home, where you will keep basically a roster of your employees and their eligibility to work in the home. So a lot of people ask when they're submitting, well, I don't have background checks. In some cases, people go out and they get what's called a person of interest report. This is something that you can obtain from the Alaska State Troopers. Do not do that. Part of the background check fees you pay includes a person of interest report that is done by the Department of Public Safety. Your NABS, when I say NABS, that's the New Alaska Background Check System, is available through myalaska.gov. This is the website that we go to if you're a resident to sign up for our dividends. You can actually go there right now and you'll actually see that underneath individuals, there is access to be able to request a background check. Now, once you submit your license to become licensed, you'll actually get access to background checks for business. Best thing to do not stress about background checks until after you have submitted your new home application, and then follow the direction of the background check unit. All right, Joe. So a little more specifics, things you need to keep in mind when it comes to the background check. What you'll do in your profile is you'll start an application. And in order to start an application, you will be at minimum required to have the social security number, last name, or date of birth of the individual you're wishing to obtain a background check for. When you put that information in, it will search the current background checks. If the applicant has a current background check in the system, it will allow you to associate to that background check, meaning that there's no fees. You're automatically connected. That person will receive instant clearance to be able to start working in your home. Now, if there's not a background check, that means you'll need to continue on with the application, fill in some of the personal and demographic information, and you'll need to get a release of information that's kept in that individual's personnel file. The applicant will be required to submit a fingerprint card to the background check program, and they'll need to pay the required fees. Currently, for a background check, it costs $73.25, which can be paid online, or it can be paid with check. which you can send to the background check program. Right now, because of COVID-19, we do not have an office, so we're not necessarily accepting cash. So you'll need to most likely pay with a credit card or with a check. The fee breakdown is $25 towards the background check unit, and then $48.25 to the Department of Public Safety and the FBI who process the fingerprints. Once the background check program has completed a registry check, they will issue a provisional license. That means that in their initial run through name check of the resident, not the resident, excuse me, the staff person, they have found no barring conditions. It is only once they issue a provisional clearance that a person can then enter your home. So please understand, if you hire someone, they cannot start working at the home, even if they're under constant supervision of caregivers, the administrator, until they have a provisional clearance from the background check. Once you've made that decision to hire a person, they are not able to come to the facility and interact with residents until after that provisional clearance is obtained. Now, if you hire somebody and you have the ability to meet with them off-site, maybe you're going to go over some of your general policies and practices at the local Starbucks with that person, that's fine, because that person does not have access to the home. They cannot have access to protected information. But once you get that provisional clearance, that person then can start working in the home. A final determination will be made and issued. So this will be once it becomes moves from a provisional status to a permanent clearance, permanent eligibility, and that means that the FBI has not shown any results on your fingerprints, and there's no barring conditions that have been located for an individual. Once you receive notice that a person is eligible for hire, you need to make sure to return to your account and click hire. It's probably one of the things we see most in our line of work is that people have a background check, but they're not hired to the home once they receive clearance. I will say that background checks are probably one of the most important elements of your assisted living home and can be the most costly. It can get very expensive to be caught not having caregivers work in your home without background checks. It very quickly can move from a very quick enforcement action to fines. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty, folks, this will conclude the session, but we still have time for lots of questions. And so let's move to the chat room. Is there any, for my licensing specialist, was there any questions that I missed during the presentation that we need to address? Awesome. For all you on that have tuned in, any questions that I might be able to answer, any topics, any burning questions?
My chat is saying that it's disabled.
Try closing your chat and reopening it. I had the same problem earlier.
My chat says the same thing too.
Interesting. I don't know why that would be. But Nate, I wanted to point out the Alaska Core Competencies, and I knew that I had just seen something come out. There's a series starting next week.
Perfect.
Of the full virtual Alaska Core Competencies series. And then there's another one scheduled for November. So folks can't attend this one next week. They can sign up for November. Plenty of room there.
Awesome. And I'm a little biased because I was actually a presenter, a trainer for the core competencies, but it's an incredible course. It can really help you feel confident and when you're going into this field. And it's a great training. I would highly recommend it. Even if you are qualified as an administrator, it's a great tool and it can really help with your business.
It appears chat is working for everyone now, and there's a question on the
Okay.
table. Does the designee have to meet the same requirements as an administrator?
So your designee will need to meet the requirements of the administrator if they are acting as an administrator for more than 90 days. So initially, no. But if that designee ever needs to come in and start fulfilling the duties of the administrator and are acting for over 90 days, they are required to meet the requirements of the administrator. We have a question there. How soon after this class can you start? I'm assuming meaning with your application. Carrie, is that what you mean? So you can submit your new home application today. This training and orientation is not required in order for you to apply for a license. We offer this training as a tool to give individuals a preview of what it's like to license an assisted living home, but you can start that process right now and submit your application today. Regarding the 1 year minimum experience, is that strictly for Alaska? Can I have experience from a different state? Absolutely. It just needs to be documented experience working with the population. That experience does not have to be within the state of Alaska. The question is, so as an LPN or RN, do I need an administrator? Going away. Do I not need an administrator, but I need a designee? So Josephine, if you as an LPN or RN are going to be the administrator, you will need a designee. If you are just going to be an owner, then you would need an administrator and a designee. So it just depends what you're choosing to do. Let's see, we have, what if the administrator has administered child care centers in the past? Does his experience count towards meeting requirements? With regarding child care, it would be very specific, and we'd want to see how that experience is translating to meet the requirements. If you are working with individual with special needs, we might look at that experience very different than just working with standard children. It just really depends. It's going to be kind of one of those that goes underneath that last category. If you believe your out-of-home experience meets that requirement, you would need to submit that and plead your case as to why that experience should count. Do we need to have everything in place before we apply for a license? So when you're applying for a license, you are required to have at minimum a location. When you submit your application, you'll want to make sure that you're including all of the policies and procedures that the application's required. We will not be conducting an inspection of the home until your application is completed, meaning that we've reviewed all of your elements. But in some cases, homes might be in the process of getting some of their furniture. All those items do not necessarily have to be in place once you get licensed. We will still come out and conduct the new home application for health, fire, and safety. And those might be items that we require you to send in later or show proof of. But often, like for example, we had a large 120 bed home that opened up. I wouldn't expect them to have 120 beds, 120 couches for each of all the rooms, because a lot of people will be bringing in their own items. So you're kind of wanting to consider both. You want to have the ability to give people the items they may need, but at the same time, not get in a situation where you've completely furnished your home, but then everybody's bringing in their own stuff, so then you need to find storage for all those items. There's a question, I want to go back and touch on the fire sprinkler system. As a 3+ bed facility in Anchorage, a system is required. What has happened to the previously established facilities that are being grandfathered in, or are they required to upgrade or retrofit a sprinkler system? So currently, any homes that were licensed before this requirement back in March of 2016 were grandfathered in. Currently, the municipality, from my understanding, is if a home that was grandfathered in closes, and is reopened within 6 months, they are still grandfathering that home into that requirement. There has not been yet any movement towards requiring homes to retrofit or upgrade yet. But right now, that number of homes that are not equipped with sprinkler system is becoming it's dwindling. And in most cases, it's becoming easier to get homes that have a sprinkler system than not. Are we allowed to rent apartments and place 2 residents there? So you do not have to own the location if your facility. You can lease a location, but you will need to provide evidence that you have permission to operate an assisted living home at the location. What are the steps required to hire what are the steps required to hire a personnel for the ALH? Do we have to make sure they are psychologically, mentally capable for the position or type of work? That's completely at your discretion as an employer. You should be doing your best to screen your employees. There's some things that are protected. It may not be your business if a caregiver has a mental health issue that they have. That's their protected health information, especially if it doesn't compromise their ability to do work. But obviously you should be doing your best to screen them and making sure that they're a good fit for your home. How long would it take after you turn in the application to become officially a licensed if I were to turn it in today? So this is probably one of the most common questions in licensing. It all depends on you. There are some specific timelines that we'll touch on tomorrow in the application in regards to how long licensing has to act on an application and what the expectations are of the applicant. But in the end, the timeline often results at the discretion of the applicant when they're submitting items. Another element, it can be at you're at the mercy of the licensing specialist's caseload. So if your application gets signed to a licensing specialist that's swamped, it might take longer for them to review elements of your application than another specialist that maybe doesn't have as much going on their caseload. In most cases, new home applications aren't necessarily going to individuals that have a busier caseload per se, but it really just depends. I would say the average time frame right now has been approximately 2 to 3 months to licensure. But like I said, there's no guarantee of time. Licensing will never say you'll be licensed in 30 days. We'll never make that guarantee because it's really depends on the applicant and the application. Question, can you choose the population you want to work with? I've worked with craniology category for 8+ years as LPN and would prefer that category. Absolutely. When you submit your application, you will be telling us what population you're wishing to serve. After completing the 10 core competencies and a year experience with the population, we can become an administrator. Also, the core competency course requires every year. Is that core competency required every year or just the 18 hours you mentioned? So the core competency is a one-time management training course. It would not be required every year, but if you wish to take it every year, you could and have it count as 18 continuing education requirement as part of your 18 continuing education education requirements. How soon can you inspect? That's going to go back to the same thing. It's going to go back to, depending on where your application is, your application will need to be completed. And at that point, the licensing specialist will contact you to set up a time to conduct an inspection. If you're outside the Anchorage area, inspections are looking very unique and different right now because of COVID-19. We're not traveling. And currently, the only inspections that we are conducting is inspections where there are no residents at the home because we have determined that we feel that's the most safe inspections that we can conduct right now. But once again, I can't give any time or how soon or how long it's going to take. It's going to be depending on how how you complete your application and how long that takes. Are we allowed to log off? Yes, feel free. But we will be back here at 1 o'clock for part 2 of this session.
Okay, and Nate, I want to take a minute also just to remind our group here that all of the training materials, including the PowerPoint that we just saw, are all available on our e-learning portal where you signed up. You've had several reminders and links and emails about how to get back in there. It's important that you do that. There's copies of the regs in there. There's copies of all the things that were discussed, handouts, and the PowerPoints. Also the evaluation for the session, which will also lead you to the certificate for contact hours for these sessions. In order to complete all of that, you'll need to go back in there and do the evaluations, but also sign back in at 1 o'clock for part 2 of our session today.
Awesome.
Anything else, Nate, that you'd like to remind folks of?
No, thank you guys so much. I think the session went fantastic. I look forward to continuing on with session 2. Thanks again to my other licensing specialists for your guys' support and backup during everything. I am getting some private questions. If you would, just send me emails to Nate, nate.allen@alaska.gov. I would appreciate it. Carrie, you had a question in the chat regarding a code. If you would send me an email about that so I can follow up with it. I'm unsure of what that is. So thanks again, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see everybody at 1 o'clock, okay?
Right. Thank you,
Okay.
Nate.
Absolutely.